This is a study of the journey of the Israelites from the land of Egypt to Sinai. Part 1 covers the Exodus from Goshen to the Red Sea, and Part 2 from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, where the sanctuary was first constructed. We will follow the outline given in the Bible and also the spirit of prophecy to help us to understand the environment and the conditions the Israelites faced during this time. The spirit of prophecy points out the importance of studying the sanctuary. In Great Controversy, page 488. The subject of the sanctuary and the investigative judgment should be clearly understood by the people of God. All need a knowledge for themselves of the position and work of their great high priest. Otherwise it will be impossible for them to exercise a faith which is essential at this time, or to occupy the position which God designs them to fill. Allusions to the sanctuary are found in most books of the Bible, and yet it is not studied in depth in Christian churches. Few have a knowledge of what is taking place in heaven right now, and how it affects their eternal destiny. For Seventh-day Adventists, it is one of our fundamental doctrines, based on Daniel 8:14. And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, a time prophecy which relates to our day. This is the geography of the area in the Middle East that we will be taking a close look at. At the top of the screen is the Mediterranean Sea, also known as the Middle Sea, or the Bible called it the Great Sea. You'll see the land of Egypt and the Sahara Desert. Egypt's capital today is Cairo, with an estimated population of 22 million in the year 2022. The Green River is the Nile, which runs north into the fertile Nile Delta and out into the Mediterranean Sea, and it was here in the eastern portion of the delta that the Israelites dwelt, Goshen, which today is known as Wadi Tumilat. The Sinai Peninsula is embraced by the two arms of the Red Sea. The left arm is known as the Gulf of Suez, described in the Bible as the tongue of the Egyptian Sea in Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 15, and the right arm is the Gulf of Aqaba. The yellow star pinpoints Canaan in the north, where the Philistines were at the time of the Exodus, and the body of water to the right of the yellow star is the Dead Sea. Now I'm going to show you the boundary line of Egyptian territory in the time of Moses. Anything west or on the left of the red line was Egyptian territory at the time of the Exodus, and this includes the Gulf of Suez, known as the tongue of the Egyptian Sea. The area of Sinai covers approximately 60,000 square kilometres. The red line represents a chain of border fortresses at the time of the Exodus, a stronghold to prevent the tribes of the eastern desert entering into Egypt, and to control traffic between Egypt on the African continent and the Asian continent to the east. Many came from the east into Egypt to trade. Today, the red line is known as the Suez Canal, where a water pathway was created so container ships can take a shortcut from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and into the Indian Ocean, instead of taking the long route around the African continent. The sandy area on the left of Sinai is the wilderness of Shur, and extends further south to the wilderness of Etham. In the time of the Exodus, there was no such term as Arabia. Instead, it was inhabited by roving tribes. The most well-known were the Amorites, descendants of Canaan from Ham, the Amalekites, descendants of Esau, and the Kenites, descendants of Midian, who was the son of Abraham and Keturah. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, was of the clan of the Kenites. He was a Midianite priest that worshipped the Creator God. When Moses fled Egypt at the age of 40, he went to Jethro's home in Midian of Sinai. The Romans identified Midian's territory on the Saudi Arabian side of the Gulf of Aqaba because of artifacts that were found there. However, the Midianites were known to inhabit Sinai on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba as well. They were also known to inhabit an area near the Dead Sea with the Moabites. Remember when Israel was on the borders of the Promised Land and Balaam sent in the Midianite woman to distract the men of Israel. The darkened areas on the bottom of Sinai show high mountain ranges. This is a Google Earth night image that shows the areas today that are densely populated. The busy Nile River, the capital Cairo and the Nile Delta. The lights along the Red Sea are the most beautiful resorts, and at the tip of Sinai is Sharm el-Sheikh, the most populated city on Sinai, with a population of over 70,000. To the north is Palestine and Israel. A daytime aerial shot. On the right or east of the Sinai Peninsula is what we know today as Saudi Arabia. In the time of Moses, the term Arabia did not exist. In Moses' time, the areas were identified by their tribal names. The area we know as Saudi Arabia was inhabited by the sons of Cush, descendants of Ham, the sons of Joktan, descendants of Shem, the sons of Keturah, Abraham's second wife, and the sons of Ishmael, Abraham's son with Hagar. During the time of the Greeks and Romans, Saudi Arabia, including Sinai, was classified as Arabia to incorporate all the Arabian tribes. In the early Christian era, the Roman Empire divided Arabia into 3 provinces, of which Sinai was included in the imperial province of Arabia Petraea. On the screen you will see the 3 divisions. Hence the allegorical text in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 25 by the Apostle Paul mentioning Mount Sinai in Arabia. You can see that Arabia in Roman terms included the Sinai Peninsula. So Mount Sinai belongs to the Sinai Peninsula. The Arab Pen Abdulaziz Saud conquered and became ruler of nearly all of Central and North Arabia. He extended his dominion into what later became the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932. He had 46 sons. The distance from Suez City to the bottom of Sinai is over 300 kilometres. The Gulf of Suez, or the tongue of the Egyptian Sea, has a maximum depth of 70 metres, or 230 feet, and varies in width today from 19 kilometres to a maximum of 32 kilometres. The shorter arm of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, has a length of 160 kilometres and a maximum depth in its centre of 1,850 metres, or 6,069 feet. Here is another map showing Sinai Peninsula and the territory of Arabia Petraea and the tribes of the Amalekites, the Amorites, and the Kenites. In the Time magazine of December 14, 1998, 8 mountains were identified as having been espoused as the true Mount Sinai. In 2022, there are 14 known sites. Why do you suppose Satan tries to confuse us in this way? He hates the law of God. He wants us to believe that the giving of the commandments to man is nothing more than a myth or a legend, and therefore the Bible can't be true. An aerial shot flying over Sinai High mountain range. Another aerial shot of the tops of the mountains. The hot, arid, desert-dominated peninsula covers a land area of about 60,000 square kilometres. Sinai is also one of the coldest provinces in Egypt because of its high altitudes and mountainous topographies. Authority over Sinai region has passed between Egypt and Israel over the years through war. However, today it is under Egyptian rule. The Passover was instituted on the 14th day of Aviv. Exodus 12, verse 2. This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So this is how the first Jewish year came about. A lamb was to be killed, and the blood applied to the tops and the sides of the doors. They were to eat the roasted flesh in haste that night, and to eat it with unleavened bread, and with their loins girded, to get ready to leave. No bones of the lamb were to be broken. Any leftovers were to be entirely immolated or burnt. At about midnight the angel of death was to pass over Egypt, to slay the firstborn of Egypt. The Passover was to be a memorial of redemption, kept by Israel for 15 centuries. The Lord said, "When I see the blood, I will pass over." The spirit of prophecy tells us the Exodus happened in the 15th century BC, 15 centuries before the Last Supper and the crucifixion. In Great Controversy, page 399. These types were fulfilled not only as to the event, but as to the time. On the 14th day of the first Jewish month, the very day and month on which for 15 long centuries the Passover lamb had been slain, Christ, having eaten the Passover with his disciples, instituted that feast, which was to commemorate his own death as the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. So that puts us between the 15th and the 14th century BC, and within this 100-year period, the Exodus took place. So from the first Passover at the Exodus to the last Passover Jesus ate with his disciples, he instituted in its place the service that was to be the memorial of his great sacrifice. The national festival of the Jews was to pass away forever. This new service which Christ established was to be observed by his followers in all lands and through all ages. Desire of Ages, page 652. Israel left Egypt in well-organized, orderly ranks on the 15th day of the first Jewish month, Aviv. The children of Israel were joyful to receive the tidings of their freedom, and made haste to leave the scene of their bondage. Before the morning broke, they were on their way. And Moses took the embalmed body of Joseph in a coffin, which they carried with them until they entered into the promised land. The people numbered more than 2 million souls, 600,000 men on foot that were over 20 years of age. The people took also with them flocks and herds, and even very much cattle. They came out with great substance, as promised to Abraham in Genesis 15. They took their dough and their kneading troughs to make unleavened bread that was required for the next 7 days. The vast armies of Israel marched in glad triumph from Egypt. The spirit of prophecy is clear in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 282, that the object of the first stage of the journey is the Red Sea. Instead of pursuing the direct route to Canaan, which lay through the country of the Philistines, the Lord directed their course southward toward the shores of the Red Sea. For God said, "Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt." On their way south they had 2 encampments, Succoth and Etham, and Etham was on the edge of the Red Sea desert. What kind of condition were they in when they left Egypt? In Patriarchs and Prophets, page 282, they were poorly prepared for an encounter with the powerful warlike Philistines. They had little knowledge of God and little faith in him. They were unarmed and unaccustomed to war. Their spirits were depressed by long bondage, and they were encumbered or burdened with women and children, flocks and herds. They had been sorely oppressed during the long years of bondage, and leading them by the way of the Red Sea, The Lord revealed himself as a God of compassion. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud, to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire, to give them light, to go by day and night. The cloud did not appear until they left their second encampment at Etham, at the edge of the wilderness. In the Bible, the cloudy pillar is not mentioned until then. God is compassionate, kind, gracious, and tender. Night and day there was the assurance of the divine presence. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. The cloud represented their divine leader. The pillar of cloud remained with Israel throughout their long journey, even when they were rebellious. An assurance to us that God will not forsake us in our way through life. Lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the world. Matthew 28:20. This cloud disappeared 40 years later, as did the manna, just before the crossing of the Jordan into Canaan. Now we are going to zoom in a little closer with Google Earth to look at this area a little closer. They have gone south. It is now the third day. Canaan lay to the northeast of Egypt, but the pillar of cloud is going to lead them in a southwesterly direction. Okay, let's zoom in now with another Google Earth image. In Exodus 14 and verse 2, the Bible uses the word turn. They were to set their course now in a southwesterly direction, away from the Egyptian border control, which would soon place the Red Sea between them and their destination. In Patriarchs and Prophets, page 283, across a dreary desert-like expanse they journeyed. Already they began to wonder whither their course would lead. They were becoming weary with the toilsome way, and in some hearts began to arise a fear of pursuit by the Egyptians. But the cloud went forward and they followed. And now the Lord directed Moses to turn aside into a rocky defile. A rocky defile is a narrow passage between large rocks or mountains, and encamped beside the sea. It was revealed to him that Pharaoh would pursue them, but that God would be honoured in their deliverance. By this time, the border control had informed Pharaoh that the Israelites were going toward the Red Sea. Pharaoh regretted letting Israel go. When it became apparent that the Israelites were pressing on toward the Red Sea, Pharaoh set out in pursuit. In Testimonies, Volume 4, page 21. The third night they found themselves walled in on each side by mountain ranges, while the Red Sea lay before them. The history of the children of Israel is written for the instruction and admonition of all Christians. When the Israelites were overtaken by dangers and difficulties, and their way seemed hedged up, their faith forsook them, and they murmured against the leader whom God had appointed for them. They blamed him for bringing them into peril, when he had only obeyed the voice of God. Exodus 14 verse 3, For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in. Escape for Israel appeared impossible. All Israel could see was disaster, defeat, and death. But God had arranged the situation so that Egypt and the surrounding nations would learn to fear and respect his name. The Lord had brought the Israelites this way to test their faith and strengthen their trust in him. On the evening of the 17th of Aviv, the command was given to go forward. They stepped forward, and the Lord sent a strong wind from the east to open up the sea. There was darkness for the Egyptians and a pillar of light to the Israelites. The Egyptians, weary with their hasty march, had encamped upon the shore for the night. They decided to take a rest and make capture in the morning. The night was intensely dark, and a deep sleep fell upon the camp of the Egyptians. Even the sentinels slumbered at their posts. A supernatural slumber. Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground through the night. In Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 15, the Bible says that they were dry-shod, which means their shoes did not get wet. The width and the height of the opening of the Red Sea is not known, but it would have had to open very wide, because when the great army of the Egyptians went through, they did not realize they were in the midst of the sea until the pillar of light turned and shone on them from the eastern end of the sea. In Exodus chapter 14, we read about the destruction of the Egyptians in the midst of the Red Sea. Not one survived. In Psalms chapter 77, verse 16 to 18, we read about God's power in the destruction of the Egyptians. The voice of thy thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightning lightened the world, and the earth trembled and shook. Proud Pharaoh and his legions, gilded chariots covered in gold, horses and riders are engulfed beneath a stormy sea. The mighty God of Israel has delivered his people. It is the morning of the 4th day since leaving Egypt, the 18th day of Aviv. Israel had travelled all through the night to the Sinai side of the Red Sea. The armour-clad bodies of the enemies are cast upon the shore. The greatest nation on earth defeated by the weakest slave nation. Jehovah alone had brought deliverance. The people were full of gratitude and faith and emotion. The Spirit of God rested upon Moses, and he led the people in a triumphant anthem of thanksgiving. Miriam, who had been richly endowed with the gifts of poetry and music, led the way as they went forth with timbrel and dance. The Song of Moses and Israel is recorded in Exodus chapter 15. This song was never to be forgotten by the Hebrew people. This song does not belong to the Jewish people alone. It points forward to the destruction to all the foes of righteousness and the final victory of the Israel of God. Our next study will be part 2, From the Red Sea to Sinai.